22, a prayer of sacrificial fellowship. 3 days, 3 times, Abraham says, "Here I am," and 3 words that surprisingly are never used before we get to this text. Those words are love, verse 2 of chapter 22, obey, 22 verse 18, and worship, 22:5. Those 3 words should describe our prayer life. This is a story where God asks of Abraham an unthinkable demand: sacrifice your son. This is a story in which Kierkegaard describes the psychological impact as the shudder of the thought. This is the story of another father and son, except then there will be no ram. This is a story of deafening silence, questions without answers. Listen to these questions, to which we only hear silence. Why did God test Abraham in this way? How could a God who condemned child sacrifice command it? Why didn't Abraham question God about this sacrifice like he did concerning the destruction of Sodom? Did Sarah know of God's command? Not one word is said about Sarah. Not one word is said about feelings, likes, and dislikes. If Sarah did know, how did she react? When did Isaac know of Abraham's intentions? How did Abraham sleep the night before? What did Abraham and Isaac talk about on the journey? Does God have to obey his own commands? Why doesn't the text say Isaac came back with Abraham? Silence on all of these. Oftentimes our prayers, all we hear is silence. Here I am, Abraham answers prayerfully after God calls his name. Chapter 22, verse 1. Isaac, the improbable and absurd sacrifice, is thrice described. Take your son, Isaac, whom you love. Chapter 22, verse 2. Moriah, the site of this unconscionable burnt offering, later becomes the site of uncountable burnt offerings at God's temple in Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1. The friend of God obeys, and early in the morning, he starts on the journey to offer this sacrifice of worship. Chapter 22, verse 3. Abraham submits to God, and Isaac submits to Abraham. How old is this living sacrifice? How old is Isaac? Old enough to walk, verse 6, to carry the sacrifice wood, verse 6, converse, verse 7, and reason, verse 7. The point is, Isaac is old enough to resist his century-plus-old father. And yet he submits. The second time, Abraham says, "Here I am," but this time to his son, chapter 22, verse 7. Hear the confusion in Isaac's voice and the heartache in Abraham's response. Where's the lamb? God himself will provide the lamb. Where's the lamb? God himself will provide the lamb. Where's the lamb? God himself will provide the lamb. Chapter 22, verse 8. Then, I presume in silence, the text says the two of them walked on together. That seemingly insignificant line is not insignificant. Love, obeying, and worship are all about walking together with others, walking with God. Significantly, God, Abraham, and Isaac are and will be in fellowship. Here I am, for a third time, as Abraham's knife is about to slit the throat or plunge into his bound, obedient son. Chapter 22, verse 11. Does the aged, loving voice tremble? Here I am. Is it filled with relief, hope, anxiety, or exasperation? Here I am. The only part of this story that I love is the end. God provides a substitute, a foreshadowing ram. Around 2,000 years later, this scene will be reenacted. There will be no ram for God, no ram for Jesus, the Son of God. Jesus, whom he loves, will be our substitute, sacrificed while saying, "Here I am," as the I am. What is our prayer challenge? Never will God ask us to sacrifice our children, but we need to make sure that we're not sacrificing them in another way. God has already sacrificed his son, so never will we have to do what he asked Abraham to do, but then stopped him. That leaves us with praying, "Here I am," when God commands us. Praying, "Here I am," when someone needs us or when asked to volunteer. Pray for fellowship within your family. Pray to love, obey, and worship. To continually say, "Here I am." Start praying. That has been Praying Through the Bible, number 12, Genesis 22, a prayer of sacrificial fellowship. If this has been a blessing to you, please share. Thank you.